Hi there. Dyeing basket reed is a simple process that you can do to dye a certain amount of reed so that you don't have to buy a full bundle of one color. So you can dye small batches of reed and be able to do different projects just with the amount of colored reed you need. For this process, you're going to want your bundle of reed or whatever amount of reed you want to dye. Here I have some flat oval that I'll be dyeing today. This is rattan reed made from a vine in Indonesia, and this is what I weave my baskets out of, so I'll be dyeing this using fiber reactive dyes. And I'm using a Dharma fiber reactive dye. I'll put links in the description below for all the tools and materials so you can find those there. This is called fiber reactive dye because you can do it in a tub of water without heat, and when it hits the material, it adheres to the surface of the material and causes the pigment to stick to the material. You'll also want a stir spoon or fork, something to move the reed around in the water. I have a large pot here with water in it, starting with lukewarm water, and that's on a towel just to keep things clean. Some soda ash fixer. This we'll use in the last step to fix the dye to the surface of the reed. Some measuring spoons, a dust mask, and latex gloves or rubber gloves of sort to protect yourself from the dye particles and from touching the dyes and the soda ash water. And then salt to add to the dye mixture. The first step to dyeing reed is to open up your bundle, and you do this to loosen it up so that the dye can get to all of the parts. But for this process, I'm not going to be dyeing this whole bundle of reed. You definitely can do a whole bundle if you want a lot of the reed, but I'm just going to do a couple of strands for a project that I'm working on. So I'm going to open this up, take off the tie at the end, and pull out a few strands of this 1/4 inch round reed. And if you start by grabbing the outside, grabbing a piece from the outside of the bundle and then pulling from around to the inside, then it's easier to get out without totally messing up the bundle. You want to work with reed that doesn't have any finish on it, so this is just raw rattan reed. If it has a finish on it, then the dye won't be able to adhere to the surface of the reed. Once you have your strands of the reed that you're going to be dyeing pulled from the bundle, you can set these aside and we'll start working on our dye bath. Now the ingredients that you'll be adding to your dye bath are water, salt, and the dye powder. So for every gallon of water, you'll want a 1/2 cup of salt and 1 tablespoon of the fiber reactive dye powder. For my purposes, I'm using 1.5 gallons of water, so I'll use 3/4 cup of salt and 1.5 tablespoons of the dye powder. So now you can mix those together, and I'm going to put on my face mask in order to protect from the dust particles of the dye, as well as my gloves. I'm going to measure out 3/4 cup of salt, and this is non-iodized salt. You don't want anything added to it to change the effects. So sprinkle this into your dye bath. Next, I'll open up my tub of the dye, and I'm going to measure out 1.5 tablespoons and sprinkle this onto the water, like so. And then use one of your stir sticks or your spoon to mix things up. And the salt will take a few minutes to dissolve in the bottom of the pot, so you'll want to stir this for a couple of minutes to get the dye all distributed and the salt totally dissolved. Once you're done working with the dye powder, you can remove your mask, but I suggest continuing to wear your gloves because the dye bath will stain your hands. Once everything is dissolved, you can take your reed and stick it into your pot. And this can mean rebundling some of the pieces so that they fit into the pot better. When all your reed is wrapped up and in your pot, you'll want to press it down into the dye bath so that it's fully submerged, and you can put a rock or a brick or something heavy on top to make sure that it sits under the water. And now I'm going to allow this to sit for 24 hours to allow it to fully dye and absorb color. I suggest doing this at a minimum of 2 hours up to 24 hours. So allow this to sit, and we'll come back after some time and rinse this off. When your reed has sat in the dye bath almost as long as you want it to, you're going to sprinkle in the soda ash. So add 1/3 of a cup of soda ash per gallon of water to your dye bath, and then allow that to sit for an extra 20 minutes so that it absorbs into the reed. Now, I did my reed without soda ash, and you can do this because you won't be washing this reed probably as much as you would fabric. Especially if you're going to seal your baskets, you won't need to finish this off with soda ash, which just helps the dye to stick to the material because you'll be sealing it and kind of locking in the color. So it might crock a little bit, which means that it will rub off onto your hands as you're weaving, or come off a little bit in the water as you soak it as you're weaving your baskets. But as soon as you dry it and then seal it or stain it, then you will have enclosed the color into the basket. Go ahead and add the soda ash if you intend to use reed without staining or sealing, but I highly suggest at least sealing your basket with a clear finish so that it protects it from mold. And I have a video here going over how to do that. You can see the color that I achieved with the hot black dye that I used, which was a Dharma fiber reactive dye. Ended up being more of a deep navy than a black. So you'll want to be aware that the dye that you use, the name on the label, is not always the color to expect on different types of fiber. So this is a rattan reed. It will probably react different than a cotton fabric or other material. So do a test if you want to try out different colors before you dive in and throw all your reed into a batch, just to make sure that you get the color that you're expecting. I hope you have fun creating colored reed to incorporate into your baskets and make lots of cool projects. Thanks for watching and supporting my channel. Like this video because it supports me in making more videos. I'll see you next time.